The Knightsbridge Mystery by Charles Reade. Part 2. They ransacked the straw and all the premises, and found nothing. Then, to make him sober and get something out of him, they pumped upon his head till he was very nearly choked. However, it told on him. He gasped for breath a while, and rolled his eyes, and then coolly asked them, had they found the villain? They shook their fists at him. "Ah, we have found the villain red-handed. I mean him as prowls about these parts in my waistcoat, and drove his knife into me last night. Wonder I didn't kill me out of hand. Have you found him amongst ye?" This question met with a volley of jeers and execrations, and the constables pinioned him and bundled him off in a cart to Bow Street to wait examination. Meantime, 2 Bow Street runners came down with a warrant and made a careful examination of the premises. The 2 keys were on the table. Mr. Gardner's outer door was locked. There was no money either in his portmanteau of Captain Cowen's. Both pistols were found loaded, but no priming in the pan of the one that lay on the bed. The other was primed, but the bullets were above the powder. Bradbury, one of the runners, took particular notice of all. Outside, blood was traced from the stable to the garden wall, and under this wall, in the grass, a bloody knife was found belonging to the Swan Inn. There was 1 knife less in Mr. Gardner's room than had been carried up to his supper. Mr. Gardner lingered till noon, but never spoke again. The news spread swiftly, and Captain Cowen came home in the afternoon, very pale and shocked. He had heard of a robbery and murder at the Swan, and came to know more. The landlady told him all that had transpired, and that the villain Cox was in prison. Cowen listened thoughtfully and said, "Cox? No doubt he is a knave. But murder? I should never have suspected him of that." The landlady pooh-poohed his doubts. "Why, sir, the poor gentleman knew him, and wounded him in self-defence, and the rogue was found a-bleeding from that very wound. And my knife, as done the murder, not a stone's throw from him as done it, which it was that Dan Fox, and he'll swing for it, please God." Then, changing her tone, she said solemnly, "You'll come and see him, sir?" "Yes," said Cowen, resolutely, with scarce a moment's hesitation. The landlady led the way and took the keys out of her pocket and opened Cowen's door. "We keep all locked," said she, half apologetically. "The magistrate bade us, and everything as we found it. God help us. There, look at your portmanteau. I wish you may not have been robbed as well." "No matter," said he. "But it matters to me," said she, "for the credit of the house." Then she gave him the key of the inner door and waved her hand toward it, and sat down and began to cry. Cowen went in and saw the appalling sight. He returned quickly, looking like a ghost, and muttered, "This is a terrible business." "It is a bad business for me and all," said she. "He have robbed you too. I'll go bail." Captain Cowen examined his trunk carefully. "Nothing to speak of," said he. "I've lost 8 guineas and my gold watch." "There, there, there," cried the landlady. "What does that matter, dame? He has lost his life." "Ah, poor soul! But 'twon't bring him back, you being robbed and all. Was ever such an unfortunate woman? Murder and robbery in my house? Travellers will shun it like a pest house. And the new landlord, he only wanted a good excuse to take it down altogether." This was followed by more sobbing and crying. Cowen took her downstairs into the bar and comforted her. They had a glass of spirits together, and he encouraged the flow of her egotism, till at last she fully persuaded herself it was her calamity that one man was robbed and another murdered in her house. Cowen, always a favourite, quite won her heart by falling into this view of the matter, and when he told her he must go back to the city again, for he had important business, and besides had no money left, either in his pockets or his rifled valise, she encouraged him to go, and said kindly, indeed it was no place for him now. It was very good of him to come back at all, but both apartments should be scoured and made decent in a very few days, and a new carpet down in Mr. Gardner's room. So Cowen went back to the city and left his notable woman to mop up her murder. At Bow Street next morning, in answer to the evidence of his guilt, Cox told a tale which the magistrate said was even more ridiculous than most of the stories uneducated criminals get up on such occasions. With this single comment, he committed Cox for trial. Everybody was of the magistrate's opinion, except a single Bow Street runner, the same who had already examined the premises. This man suspected Cox, but had one qualm of doubt founded on the place where he had discovered the knife, and the circumstances of the blood being traced from that place to the stable, and not from the inn to the stable, and on a remark Cox had made to him in the cart. "I don't belong to the house. I hadn't got no keys to get in and out o' nights, and if I took a hatful of gold, I'd be off with it into another country. Wouldn't you? Him as took the gentleman's money, he knew where 'twas, and he have got it. I didn't, and I hadn't." Bradbury came down to the Swan and asked the landlady a question or two. She gave him short answers. He then told her that he wished to examine the wine that had come down from Mr. Gardiner's room. The landlady looked him in the face and said it had been drunk by the servants or thrown away long ago. "I have my doubts of that," said he. "And welcome," said she. Then he wished to examine the keyholes. "No," said she. "There has been prying enough into my house." Said he angrily, "You are obstructing justice. It is very suspicious." "It is you that is suspicious, and a mischief maker into the bargain," said she. "How do I know what you might put into my wine and my keyholes, and say you found it? You are well known, you Bow Street runners, for hanky-panky tricks. Have you got a search warrant to throw more discredit upon my house? No, then pack, and learn the law before you teach it to me." Bradbury retired bitterly indignant, and his indignation strengthened his faint doubt of Cox's guilt. He set a friend to watch the Swan, and he himself gave his mind to the whole case, and visited Cox in Newgate 3 times before his trial. The next novelty was that legal assistance was provided for Cox by a person who expressed compassion for his poverty and inability to defend himself, guilty or not guilty, and that benevolent person was Captain Cowen. In due course Daniel Cox was arraigned at the bar of the Old Bailey for robbery and murder. The deposition of the murdered man was put in by the Crown, and the witnesses sworn who heard it, and Captain Cowen was called to support a portion of it. He swore that he supped with the deceased and loaded one pistol for him, while Mr. Gardiner loaded the other, lent him the key of his own door for further security, and himself slept in the city. The judge asked him where, and he said 13 Farringdon Street. It was elicited from him that he had provided counsel for the prisoner. His evidence was very short and to the point. It did not directly touch the accused, and the defendant's counsel, in spite of his client's eager desire, declined to cross-examine Captain Cowen. He thought a hostile examination of so respectable a witness, who brought nothing home to the accused, would only raise more indignation against his client. The prosecution was strengthened by the reluctant evidence of Barbara Lamb. She deposed that 3 years ago Cox had been detected by her stealing money from a gentleman's table in the Swan Inn, and she gave the details. The judge asked her whether this was at night. "No, my lord, at about 4 of the clock. He is never in the house at night. The mistress can't abide him." "Has he any key of the house?" "Oh dear, no, my lord." The rest of the evidence for the Crown is virtually before the reader. For the defence, it was proved that the man was found drunk, with no money nor keys upon him, and that the knife was found under the wall, and the blood was traceable from the wall to the stable. Bradbury, who proved this, tried to get in about the wine, but this was stopped as irrelevant. "There is only one person under suspicion," said the judge, rather sternly. As counsel were not allowed in that day to make speeches to the jury, but only to examine and cross-examine and discuss points of law, Daniel Cox had to speak in his own defence. "My lord," said he, "it was my double done it." "Your what?" asked my lord, a little peevishly. My double. There's a rogue prowls about the Swan at nights, which you couldn't tell him from me. Laughter from the court. You needn't to laugh me to the gallows. I tell you, he have got a nose like mine. Laughter from the court. Clerk of Arraigns. Keep silence in the court, on pain of imprisonment. And he have got a waistcoat, the very spit of mine, and a tumble-down hat, such as I do wear. I saw him go by, and let hisself into the Swan, with a key, and I told Sam Pott next morning. Judge. Who is Sam Pott? Culprit. Why, my stable boy, to be sure. Judge. Is he in court? Culprit. I don't know. Ah, there he is. Judge. Then you better call him. Culprit. Hi, Sam. Sam. Here be I. Loud laughter. The judge explained calmly that to call a witness meant to put him in the box and swear him, and that although it was irregular, yet he should allow Pott to be sworn, if it would do the prisoner any good. Prisoner's counsel said he had no wish to swear Mr. Pott. Well, Mr. Gurney, said the judge, I don't think he can do you any harm, meaning in so desperate a case. Thereupon Sam Pott was sworn, and deposed that Cox had told him about his double. When? Often and often. Before the murder? Long before that. Counsel for the Crown. Did you ever see this double? Not I. Counsel. I thought not. Daniel Cox went on to say that on the night of the murder he was up with a sick horse, and he saw his double let himself out of the inn the back way, and then turned round and closed the door softly, so he slipped out to meet him. But the double saw him, and made for the garden wall. He ran up and caught him with one leg over the wall, and seized a black bag he was carrying off. The figure dropped it, and he heard a lot of money chink. That, thereupon, he cried, "Thieves!" and seized the man, but immediately received a blow and lost his senses for a time. When he came to, the man and the bags were both gone, and he felt so sick that he staggered to the stable and drank a pint of neat brandy. And he remembered no more till they pumped on him and told him he had robbed and murdered a gentleman inside the Swan Inn. What they can't tell me, said Daniel, beginning to shout, is how I could know who has got money and who hasn't inside the Swan Inn. I keeps the stables, not the inn, and where be my keys to open and shut the Swan? I never had none. And where's the gentleman's money? 'Twas somebody in the inn has done it, for to have the money, and when you find the money, you'll find the man. The prosecuting counsel ridiculed this defence, and inter alia asked the jury whether they thought it was a double the witness Lamb had caught robbing in the inn 3 years ago. The judge summed up very closely, giving the evidence of every witness. What follows is a mere synopsis of his charge. He showed it was beyond doubt that Mr. Gardner returned to the inn with money, having collected his rents in Wiltshire, and this was known in the inn and proved by several, and might have transpired in the yard or the tap-room. The unfortunate gentleman took Captain Cowan, a respectable person, his neighbour in the inn, into his confidence, and revealed his uneasiness. Captain Cowan swore that he supped with him, but could not stay all night, most unfortunately. But he encouraged him, left him his pistols, and helped him load them. Then his lordship read the dying man's deposition. The person thus solemnly denounced was found in the stable, bleeding from a recent wound, which seems to connect him at once with the deed as described by the dying man. But here, said my lord, the chain is no longer perfect. A knife taken from the Swan was found under the garden wall, and the first traces of blood commenced there and continued to the stable, and were abundant on the straw and on the person of the accused. This was provided by the constable and others. No money was found on him, and no keys that could have opened any outer doors of the Swan Inn. The accused had, however, 3 years before, been guilty of a theft from a gentleman in the inn, which negatives his pretence that he always confined himself to the stables. It did not, however, appear that on the occasion of the theft he had unlocked any doors or possessed the means. The witness for the Crown, Barbara Lamb, was clear on that. The prisoner's own solution of the mystery was not very credible. He said he had a double, or a person wearing his clothes and appearance, and he had seen this person prowling about long before the murder, and had spoken of the double to one Pott. Pott deposed that Cox had spoken of this double more than once, but admitted he never saw the double with his own eyes. This double, says the accused, on the fatal night let himself out of the Swan and escaped to the garden wall. There he, Cox, came up with this mysterious person, and a scuffle ensued, in which a bag was dropped and gave the sound of coin. And then Cox held the man and cried, "Thieves!" but presently received a wound and fainted, and on recovering himself staggered to the stables and drank a pint of brandy. The story sounds ridiculous, and there is no direct evidence to back it, but there is a circumstance that lends some colour to it. There was one blood-stained instrument, and no more, found on the premises, and that knife answers to the description given by the dying man, and indeed may be taken to be the very knife missing from his room. And this knife was found under the garden wall, and there the blood commenced and was traced to the stable. "Here," said my lord, "to my mind lies the defence. Look at the case on all sides, gentlemen, and undoubted murder done by hands, no suspicion resting on any known person but the prisoner, a man who had already robbed in the inn, a confident recognition by one whose deposition is legal evidence, but evidence we cannot cross-examine, and a recognition by moonlight only, and in the heat of a struggle. If on this evidence, weakened not a little by the position of the knife and the traces of blood, and met by the prisoner's declaration, which accords with that single branch of the evidence, you have a doubt, it is your duty to give the prisoner the full benefit of that doubt, as I have endeavoured to do. And if you have no doubt, why, then you have only to support the law and protect the lives of peaceful citizens. Whoever has committed this crime, it certainly is an alarming circumstance that, in a public inn, surrounded by honest people, guarded by locked doors and armed with pistols, a peaceful citizen can be robbed like this of his money and his life. The jury saw a murder at an inn, an accused who had already robbed in that inn, and was denounced as the murderer by the victim. The verdict seemed to them to be Cox, of impunity. They all slept at inns, a double they had never seen, undetected accomplices they had all heard of. They waited 20 minutes and brought in their verdict. Guilty. The judge put on his black cap and condemned Daniel Cox to be hanged by the neck till he was dead. End of section 12. Recording by Edward Kirkby, Warwick, England.